The morning had started with the kind of quiet promise I loved. Sky-streaked in pale lavender breeze, light through the curtains, and the kettle whistling like a familiar friend. I had packed my overnight bag the night before, of course, 2 cardigans, a small tin of Hester's favorite Darjeeling tea, and a worn paperback of Willa Cather I'd meant to lend her for over a year now. Everything was in order. Every first Friday of the month, like clockwork, I visited Hester in Bennington. We'd made it a tradition after her hip surgery 3 years ago, and I looked forward to it more than I let on. Just the 2 of us, laughing over lemon bars, gossiping about old students and aches that showed up like uninvited guests. I stepped into the cab at 8:15 sharp. Jasper, my regular driver, greeted me with his usual wink. "Ready to escape, Miss Norwood," he said. "I am," I replied, settling into the back seat with a small exhale. We were halfway to the station, coasting past that little antique shop with the chipped rooster sign, when something tugged at my stomach. I reached into my purse, wallet, tissues, breath mints, even the crossword book, but no ID. My hand froze. My license. I'd taken it out to photocopy it last week for a volunteer form and must have tucked it back into the desk drawer instead of my wallet. "Oh no," I muttered. "Jasper, I think I've done something foolish." He chuckled, glancing at me in the rear view. "Want me to turn around?" "Yes, please. I forgot my license. No problem at all. We've got time." I smiled faintly, grateful for his calm. Still, I felt a small embarrassment bloom behind my ribs. These little slips had been happening more often lately. Misplaced keys, double-booked appointments. Not serious, but just enough to make me aware. The ride back was quiet. As we turned into my street, I could already see the dogwood in front of the house starting to bloom. I asked Jasper to wait no more than 5 minutes, I promised. I stepped out my shoes, clicking gently against the walkway. The house was exactly as I'd left it, still, calm. But as I reached the porch, a low, hushed voice floated from inside, urgent, unfamiliar in tone. I paused on the last step of the porch, my hand hovering just above the doorknob. It was faint at first, murmured words, 2 voices threading through the wooden frame of the front window. I knew that rhythm. Celeste's clipped speech when she was trying to sound rational. Mason's low, cautious replies, always calculated. I leaned ever so slightly toward the window pane, careful not to shift the boards beneath my feet. The curtains were drawn only halfway, and though I couldn't see much, their words came through, clear enough to make my breath catch. "She's been forgetting things, little stuff." "Left the stove on last week," Celeste said, voice low. That was one time Mason replied, his tone nervous. "It doesn't matter. It's the pattern that matters. She's getting soft. We'll use the next visit to Hester's. She always comes back more sentimental. She'll sign if we frame it the right way." "Sign what?" There was a pause, then the unmistakable rustle of papers. I put together a basic draft. Celeste continued. "Power of attorney. Just a general one. Nothing extreme." "Are you sure she won't suspect?" Mason asked. "She trusts me blindly." Mason. Always has. The breath went out of me like someone had pressed a hand to my chest. I took a step back from the window, my spine stiff against the railing. A part of me wanted to burst in demand to know what they were plotting. But another part, older, sharper, the part of me that had raised a child alone, told me to stay still. To listen. Mason spoke again, quieter now. "I don't want this to backfire." "What if she talks to someone?" "She won't. She hates confrontation. She'll probably feel bad for making us wait this long. You'll see." My fingers curled around the porch post. I felt something stir in my gut, not just betrayal, but something colder. Strategy. I turned and walked softly down the steps, waving at Jasper as if nothing had happened. "Got it?" he asked, smiling. "Yes," I said, settling back into the cab, pulsa, steady now. "Let's head home, not to Hester's, not today. There were things I needed to remember, and more I needed to uncover." As the cab pulled away from the station, I asked Jasper to take the long way back. I needed the time. I needed the silence. My hands sat folded in my lap, but my mind had already dropped into the deep, winding tunnel of memory, the place I used to visit only in moments of reflection. Now It felt like a crime scene. Celeste had been everything to me. After Ezra died, sudden heart failure at 38, I was left with a toddler, a mortgage, and the kind of loneliness that no well-meaning neighbor or casserole could soften. I was 36, a newly tenured literature professor, and by the end of that year, I'd walked away from it all. Not because I had to, because I wanted to be the kind of mother I never had. I turned the guest room into a nursery, sold my grandmother's pearls to cover Celeste's first year at the Montessori preschool, and never told her what I gave up to keep her life unmarred by scarcity. Later, when she went off to college, I picked up adjunct work, took editing contracts, anything, to make sure she didn't worry about rent or books. I even gave her the down payment for her first house. She cried and called me her hero. At the time, I thought I was doing it right, that this was love. She never asked about the things I let go. I never offered. That was our rhythm she needed, I provided. Once when she was in her early 30s, we were sitting in the garden, and she laughed wine in hand and said, "I've never worried a day in my life because you always fix everything." At the time, I smiled. I thought she meant it with affection. Now the words hung differently. They weren't gratitude. They were a confession, a blueprint. I had raised her to believe that comfort was owed, not earned. That love meant absorbing all burdens, that I would always be the net beneath her fall, even if she was the one shaking the tightrope. Jasper pulled into my driveway. I thanked him and stepped out slower this time. I walked toward the house that held a lifetime of effort, of sacrifice, and realized I no longer knew what she saw when she looked at me. Maybe it was time I found out exactly how much she thought I couldn't see. The following Monday, I walked into the branch office of White Valley Credit Union with a knot sitting squarely beneath my ribs. I hadn't planned on going in person. I'd initially just wanted to check my balance online. But the login page rejected me 3 times, and the forgot password code never arrived. So I got dressed, straightened my collar, and walked in like a woman on an errand, when really I was walking into a moment I couldn't unlive. Paul, my account manager, for over a decade, greeted me with his usual warmth. "Miss Norwood, it's been a while. Everything all right? I hope so," I said, settling into the worn leather chair across from his desk. "But I'd like to review my account's transactions, contact info, any recent changes." He nodded, typing quickly. Then he paused. "Well, that's strange," he murmured. "There were 2 attempted transfers from your savings account last week, both flagged and blocked by our system. Large amounts. Unusual pattern for your profile." He turned the screen toward me. $4, $800, and $6,000, both halted. "I didn't authorize any transfers," I said. My voice felt thin. "I know. That's why they were flagged. We tried to call you, but the number in your file had been updated. Updated by who Paul clicked deeper. It was changed last Tuesday. When we called the new number, a woman answered. She identified herself as your daughter, said you were traveling, and she was handling things. In the meantime, my fingers went cold around the armrest. Celeste hadn't waited for me to sign anything. She was already acting as if I had. I forced my breathing to stay even. I'd like the number updated again. Today? To this. I slid a small piece of paper across the desk. And I'd like to change all my passwords and set a personal confirmation protocol. No third-party access, not even family. Paul nodded solemnly. "We'll take care of it right now." I walked out into the sharp brightness of mid-morning with my coat open and my hands curled into fists. The betrayal wasn't a future plan anymore. It had already begun. And if they dared to touch my accounts, I had to find out what else they'd already reached. That night, I downloaded a simple voice recorder app. I didn't know what I'd catch, but I needed to be ready. The next afternoon, I brought a casserole to Celeste's house under the excuse of a visit. She wasn't home, just Mason, who said she was out running errands. He thanked me and stepped away to take a call, leaving me alone in the entryway. Something drew me to the sideboard near the dining room. The drawers were neatly arranged like always. Pens, receipts, a stapler. Then, at the bottom, a blue folder. I opened it. Inside, copies of my driver's license, social security card, and the deed to my house. On top sat a draft of a general power of attorney with my name typed neatly at the top. There were handwritten notes in the margins. Use Henry visit, schedule notary check. If alone after trip, I froze. These weren't reminders. They were a strategy. My own daughter had mapped out my habits, my travel dates, my weak spots. This wasn't protection. This was planning. She hadn't been waiting for me to sign something. She'd already built the machine. All she needed was my signature to turn it on. I replaced the papers carefully and closed the drawer without a sound. Mason was still on the phone, unaware. I walked out smiling, like nothing had changed. But inside, everything had. Celeste wasn't just trying to manage my affairs. She was trying to take them, piece by piece, smile by smile, and I realized for the first time in my life that the safest place to stand wasn't always beside the people you love, but sometimes just out of their reach. Celeste called midweek, her voice sugary sweet. We were thinking of coming by Friday for lunch, me, Henry, and a couple of the girls. It's been too long since they've seen you. I told her I'd love to see them. I even meant it, at least the part about Henry. They arrived just after 11. Celeste in a crisp blouse and forced brightness, Henry bouncing with a bag of markers, and Lila and Maureen carrying a pie and bouquets of compliments. Your hydrangeas are stunning, Dalia Lila said. And this porch, it's like something from a magazine. I smiled, offered iced tea, and played along. They sat in the garden while I brought out plates. I'd made lemon chicken and a salad, comfort food, something familiar. That's what they wanted. Familiarity, calm, the kind of mood that makes a person say yes without thinking. At 11:45, Mason arrived, apologizing for being late. Just in time, Celeste said, eyes flicking toward the hallway. He placed a gray leather folder on the console table without a word. I took a breath and excused myself to get more lemonade, stepping into the kitchen just long enough to activate the recorder on my phone and slip it into my apron pocket. My hands didn't shake this time. Back at the table, everyone was chatting about school schedules and rising grocery prices. Celeste kept smiling eyes flitting toward the folder like it was a ticking clock. After we cleared the plates, she stood and wiped her hands on a napkin. Mom, she said, cheerful, casual, we brought something for you to take a look at. Just a simple form, nothing urgent. It's something Lila and Maureen helped their parents with, too. I met her gaze, so wide, so bright, so rehearsed. She gestured toward the folder. We thought, while we're all here, it might be a good time. I nodded slowly. Of course, I said, reaching for the stack of papers. Then I turned to Henry and asked if he wanted to help me open the folder together. Henry had just finished his second helping of pie legs, swinging beneath the table, when he leaned back in his chair and grinned. Mom said this'll be our new house, he chirped. The conversation stopped mid-sentence. Forks hovered. The sun through the dining room window suddenly felt too bright. Celeste's head whipped toward him. Henry, she said too quickly. That's not what I said. Don't be silly. But you did, he replied, blinking. You told Dad we'd put a pool in the backyard, and you said Grandma was giving it to us because she's moving to a smaller place with no stairs. Maureen's eyebrows lifted. Lila coughed awkwardly. I smiled at Henry and reached for the folder Mason had placed on the table. My fingers slid it open with deliberate slowness. Let's see what this is about, then. Celeste stood frozen. Mason looked at the door. The document on top was exactly what I expected. I lifted it, held it between my fingers like a recipe card. General Durable Power of Attorney, I read aloud, including but not limited to the right to sell mortgage or dispose of real property, to manage bank accounts, and to make legal decisions on behalf of the principal. I looked up. Why would I need to sign this? Celeste's face shifted in slow motion. The sweet smile drained from her cheeks like color down a sink. Mom, it's just, this is standard. Everyone's doing it these days. Lila and Maureen helped their moms write. Lila's mouth opened, then closed. Maureen looked down at her napkin. You said this was just a form, I said. calm as a page turning, but it's a complete transfer of control over my finances, my home. Celeste's voice cracked. You're making it a thing. I was just trying to help you forget things. You're not getting any younger. The words hung in the air like a slap. She had said the quiet part out loud. I folded the paper, placed it back in the folder, and pushed it across the table. Then I looked at Maureen. Would you mind helping me clear the dishes? Celeste left in a blur of stomping heels and unfinished sentences. Mason followed, after a long, hollow pause, saying nothing, his hand barely brushing the edge of the folder before pulling back as if it burned. Maureen and Lila gathered their coats without meeting my eyes. Their goodbyes were soft and scrambled, like people leaving a wake. And then there was quiet. For the first time in years, no one called the next day, or the day after that. No text, no check-in, no apology. It was the kind of silence that didn't just sit in the room, it pressed down on it. A vacuum where love used to be. I made tea in the morning, out of habit, poured 2 cups, then stared at the second one for a full minute before pouring it down the drain. I walked the garden path, but didn't stop to smell the hyacinths. I didn't need perfume to know I'd been made invisible. I wasn't being punished with words. I was being erased. By the 4th day, I opened the file drawer in my study and took out the manila folder I never thought I'd use. A list of elder law attorneys I'd kept on hand for volunteer work at the library. Elijah Brandt took my call the same afternoon. He didn't flinch when I told him the details. We'll file paperwork to revoke access, place a hold on any third-party banking activity, and notify the county clerk's office to freeze any title modifications. I signed every document he sent that night. Then I wrote a letter to Celeste short, but without room for misinterpretation. Any further attempt to access my account's property or legal affairs will be met with legal action. I hope one day we can rebuild trust. But today is not that day. I placed it in an envelope, walked it to her mailbox, and never looked back. By the following Monday, the quiet hadn't lifted, but it had changed. I wasn't just a mother waiting in silence. I was a woman protecting what was hers. It had been almost 3 weeks when I heard the knock, soft, hesitant, like someone hoping not to be answered. I opened the door to find Celeste standing there alone. No folder, no forced smile, just a pale woman with tired eyes and trembling hands. She didn't ask to come in. She just whispered, "Please," and I stepped aside. We sat in the living room without tea, without pleasantries. She didn't pretend. "I'm sorry," she said, "for all of it." I waited, not because I needed to punish her, but because I wanted to hear if she'd tell the truth, not just the what, but the why. She folded her hands and stared at them. Mason and I, we were in over our heads. Business loans, credit cards, all of it. We started thinking the house could save us, that you could save us. Again, she looked up. "But that's the problem, isn't it? You always saved me. You made everything easy. You handled my tuition. You covered my down payment. You even made my excuses sound better than they were." Her voice cracked. "I never learned how to fall because you never let me hit the ground, even when I deserved to." Something in me softened, but not in the old way, not in the way that rushed to fix. Just a quiet shift, like a book finally closing after a chapter too long. "I was the child, not you," she whispered. "You gave me everything but consequences." I nodded slowly. "You're not wrong." The room was still, but the silence felt different this time. Not erasure, not avoidance, just space. She didn't beg. She didn't ask for money. She only said, "I want to learn how to take care of myself. I don't know how yet, but I want to try." We sat there for a long time. I didn't offer solutions. I didn't write a check. I just listened. And when she asked if she could visit again sometime with no agenda, no documents, I said yes. But this time, she'd have to knock, like someone asking, not assuming. Forgiveness came slowly, like light returning after a storm, not in grand gestures, not in sudden embraces, but in the shape of boundaries carefully laid. I told Celeste what I needed to feel safe again, what I needed to love her without fear. No more shared accounts, no legal access, no assumptions of control. If she needed help, she would ask, with words, with honesty, not manipulation. To my surprise, she didn't argue. She simply nodded. I understand, she said, and I'll earn whatever comes next. Mason was gone. They had separated quietly without drama after everything came undone. He'd gone to live with his brother in Colorado, and Celeste, for the first time since college, was living alone. Paying bills, working full-time, managing late fees, groceries, errands, all the things I used to shield her from. It wasn't easy, but it was hers. What surprised me most was what returned when the weight lifted. Henry started coming back, first with guarded steps, then with his usual brightness. He brought me drawings me with gray hair and a cape, standing on a roof with the words Super G written underneath. We made banana bread and planted basil in little clay pots. He asked if he could stay the weekend again, like before, and I said yes, as long as his homework came too. And it did. Celeste came for tea on Sundays sometimes with news of her week, sometimes just to sit in silence and pull weeds from the garden with me. She never mentioned the house again, and I began to come back to myself. I returned to my poetry circle at the library. I printed a new copy of my will, signed under the guidance of my own attorney. I planted rosemary and lavender along the porch, and each morning I sat with a warm mug and remembered that my peace had been earned, not surrendered. Because love, I learned, is not about giving everything away. Love is about choosing what to give and what to protect.